Okay.
Okay, so Vonda, take it away.
So with the smaller group, we looked at some themes that we felt like over the meetings that we've had are themes that have sort of come up, and narratives, and sort of, I think we've all done a good job of this, of trying to think about, what is the story that Howard County and Columbia tells about itself, and what was that story? What is that story? And is that story accurate? And how it sort of falls into some of these land use issues. So, and we split that into a few themes that we think have come up and that we should probably focus our discussions on. So I think the first one is the one that sort of is the most is sort of the one where everything else feeds into it, and I think is maybe the area where we feel like this group could have the biggest sort of policy recommendation impact, and that would be, what are ways that this group can impact the master general plan that's in process now? And with the big one there being the public service,
The PSA.
PSA, where that is now, the impact that has in terms of the development decisions that are currently being made and will be made in the future, and does that make sense, and whether or not even that can be changed. So that's a big part of what we're looking at when we say, can we impact the master and general plan? The second one is, are some of the demographic segregation trends we see today, are those based solely on some housing development choices, or are they also impacted by sort of historical segregation that was really in place before Columbia sort of was created? And to think about that, and sort of as we're trying to come up with solutions, keeping in mind that are some of the reasons why people live where they live have less to do with more recent housing development choices, and are also, we're also dealing with some historical factors. And I think Suzanne has talked about this also in terms of, where do people feel welcome, right? That's when people are thinking about where they want to live, that's an important piece of this. Where do people feel welcome? So that's sort of the second theme that we've been thinking about. The next one is the PSA really limiting housing development? And I think that's a two-pronged a question I think we're looking at in two ways. On the one hand, of course, it's designed to do that. So the land that's inside the public service line is slated for denser development, because there are already the public utilities and water and sewer available, and land that's outside of it is supposed to be limited in development. But I think the question here is it really limiting that development? The sense is that it's not really limiting development outside of the public service line. It's different. It ends up being different development, more expensive development, and development then, because of that, ends up being more exclusionary. So, so the question is, what is that line really doing when it comes to housing development? And then we had here in the parentheses, or is it an excuse to preserve segregated housing and education? And I think that the presentation we just saw on Apfo was an interesting example of that, how the areas that have been allocated for more development are also the areas where the schools are most overcrowded. The areas that are, quote unquote, have lower allocations are the areas where the schools are open and therefore, in theory, could support more development. And we have some suggestions there in the bullet points. And then this last point was something interesting that Phil brought up. Is there a diversity problem on the zoning board itself? And he might be able to talk a little bit more about that, because I think he is on the zoning board. And the ways in which, if there is a diversity problem on the zoning board, or even if we say, if there isn't a lot of diversity, before we call it a problem, if there isn't a lot of diversity on the zoning board, what does that mean in terms of how projects are looked at, the approval process, and and what could be done to increase diversity so that more members of the community are participating in these decisions.
Thank you, Vonda. We can continue to go through some of the categories of work, but why don't I just stop folks there for just some reactions to these themes? Does this, first of all, I can never say enough thanks. So just thank you for putting that together. And Vonda, thank you for giving the oral overview there. Would folks, how does this resonate with folks? Are these sort of resonate as the questions to explore? Are there others that are on the table? I see Jonathan.
Sorry.
Oh, Suzanne, sorry. Suzanne, as crafter, I am going to go to you. And then I'll go to Jonathan.
I'm just going to say, thank you, Vonda, for stepping up to the plate there. I know it would make more sense since I typed this stuff up before we have done it, but I appreciate the teamwork. I just, I guess after our presentations today and looking at our notes, there was our meetings that we had to prepare these notes were so energetic, so optimistic, so hopeful. I mean, just the understanding that Vonda and Phil have about our county and the history of the county and the things that are in place that may be, guiding or constraining or keeping things the way they are. And I just, I appreciate so much the presentations that we have had today, but it just seems like everyone that we talk to, it's almost kind of like, like, I don't know, like this, it could just be me, but this feeling that there's this general assumptions that there's certain things that are just not gonna, West, for example, is the rural West, for example. I feel like I'm looking at a map, right? I'm looking at huge areas that are developed. And then it's like, oh, no, there's only 1 or 2%. Yeah, a little bit of that is in the West. And, we are thinking about that. I don't know. I don't get the feeling that there's anybody, at the table that is like fighting to say, well, wait, let's revisit this before this next plan is cranked out and we get too far down the road, it's just like this whole "the emperor has no clothes" thing. We're like waving our hands and saying, "Well, wait, there's a possibility." Well, what about isn't it? But that's not it. Not to be contentious or anything. For me, right in this second, it feels a little emotionally exhausting after what all the energy that we sort of have put into brainstorming. All of us as an entire subgroup. It's like, so these are the things. There are a few things that are recommended that we should probably recommend, and we should look at those things. But I hope that we are able to stick with them. I think we have thought through some of these ideas, and they're legitimate things to explore. And so that's that. That's what I want to say.
Suzanne, thanks for being honest about how this is hitting you. I saw some nods.
Jessica's hand.
Yeah. So let's do Jonathan and Jessica. Is that okay? Or Jessica, do you have something to directly respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an overall comment just in case others on our subgroup are feeling a little damper. Don't lose your enthusiasm. I'm still optimistic. I think we have an opportunity to make some real change. Take it as we are going to make better informed decisions now that things have been broken down for us. So Suzanne, I feel you, but let's get back to our groove and ride this wave. We are charged to make some change, and we're going to do it. I just wanted to tell you because I feel you, and it is a difference in how you felt a week ago. So don't lose your enthusiasm. We are going to definitely put some things in place.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
So I had something to say, but I wanted to react to Suzanne first. I agree. And when it comes to the West, look, if there's if there's land out there that is being preserved for agricultural use and it's being used for agricultural, okay, maybe that's one thing. But the other thing I'm seeing in the West again are these 1 to 3 acre lots that preclude more efficient use of the land. And I live on a 5-house cul-de-sac in Columbia. So there are 5 homes on less land than some single family homes are sitting on, out there in the West. And that is not an effective or efficient use of land. And that is limiting opportunity for, not only more housing in the West, but also different types of housing in the West. So I'm with you 100%. And just because it's been going in that direction and maybe a lot of that land is claimed now and, it's under private ownership and the house is already built, it doesn't mean we can't stop that, even if we can only get a percent of that back or something. So I'm with you. Overall, I just wanted to say thank you to the I guess the subgroup who put this together, because in my opinion, it's spot on. I think it summarizes what we've been talking about well. I think you really nailed it, and I appreciate it. The one thing I wanted to point out, and I don't know if you can scroll to the section where we were talking about, I think there was a section where we were talking about whether, what are some of the barriers, including whether people feel comfortable in certain areas. There was something I saw, and I wanted us to consider maybe making a change. I don't see it yet. Oh,
I think it's the second
is
explore.
it the second one?
Let's see, right, the explore the demographic. Yeah, that one.
Here we go. Okay. To expand housing options without addressing possible historical factors of segregation trends is to invite potential culture clashes. How could we avert? Would it be worth the effort? I personally feel that should be reworded. And I would strike, would it be worth the effort? Because what if the answer, what if an answer we get is no? Is that acceptable to us? Because that's sort of what we were hearing during some of the redistricting. If you go back and look at some of the rhetoric, some of what was being said was, don't move people around. They were free to choose where they want to live, and they live where they want to live. So they've segregated themselves. Well, there are 2 problems with that. One is housing opportunity throughout the county is not equally distributed. So some people can't afford to live in some parts of the county. And the other part of that could be some people weren't comfortable. So maybe they did in a way self-segregate, but that's not necessarily right. And I don't think we should be asking whether it's worth addressing that. I think it's something, especially in 2021, that just needs to be addressed. And that should be our statement.
I second that motion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Can you edit? Laura?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, are you okay with just deleting that, or did you want? Did you want to keep on the belonging piece?
I think, I don't know. I kind of have a problem with the whole thing because it, tends to invite potential culture clashes. How can we avert? Sometimes averting those things is avoiding, and I want to make sure we don't set this up so that anyone can say the option is just not to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost like how do we tackle this? How do we I want to put a more positive question where the answer can't be we just don't do it. The answer has to be we do something. And I'm sorry, I can't think of the right language off the top of my head. I just know I don't want a question that can end in the answer of no.
You're saying tends, but the word is actually trends. So it was a statement, to expand housing options without addressing possible historical factors.
Sorry, it is trend. Yes.
Trends. Yeah, and so that's what. So I think when you add your question on the end of that, like that, I don't know. I think that's good.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I think that's good.
Do you mind I write that and we can think on it.
And then we can change could to can.
Yeah, I would make it even more positive if people are willing to, and say to expand housing options, it is necessary to address possible historical factors of segregation.
Peter, I like that. That's great.
And then how will we address and reverse these harmful trends is a good question. And as is the second bullet, how is a systemic racism How is this systemic racism showing up in Howard County in 2021? I think those are good questions to ask, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it's necessary to address the past.
What do you think about getting rid of the possible?
Yeah, it's not possible. There certainly are historic factors.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
You all are bringing my energy back. Yay. Let's fight this thing.
Yeah. So, why don't we move on to talking about some of the initial recommendations put down here on paper?
I'm sorry, can I
Yeah, oh,
Can I
please.
just
Yep.
really
Yep.
quickly before moving on, I just wanted to thank the group for coming up with the political representation piece. I do think if you look at the housing, one of the ways that, traditionally to keep representation down is to draw districts that segregate groups. And while I'm not sure the district's been drawn that way, I believe that the patterns related to multifamily housing and therefore who's living in that housing has led that way. But I don't know, and this would take a real analysis that's way beyond me. I think it's important to raise the question, even if we don't answer it. So I'm really glad that got put in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm butting in here. Is it okay if I talk? Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was very, very positive about what was put together here is I think the first step toward some kind of idea about how to solve these big problems is first to admit that they are big problems. And just like we just spoke a second ago, that in fact certain areas like the one I live in have been redistricted into schools to make them more segregated. It was an intentional move, and it was given a veneer of we can give special resources, or we can. In fact, when the redistricting mess happened this past year, that was one of the pushbacks. If you keep the schools segregated, we'll get more money. Okay, well, that's absolutely backwards. So these things are going on, maybe originally for good reasons, but actually they're really accelerating the rate of segregation. And unfortunately, we're developing in Howard County an urban core, which is becoming increasingly minority and increasingly poor, surrounded by rich suburbs. Well, that was exactly what we tried to avoid by moving to Columbia. So anyway, I think it's good that these things are in here. We definitely can sharpen them up a little bit. We don't have to be tentative. These are serious things. Yeah, we brought up.
Thank you. Why don't we move to some of the initial areas? I'm just looking at time. Why don't we discuss these initial categories of work, like the potential recommendations, then with the goal of having another subgroup of people, another smaller working group, start to workshop. Either we divide them up and some folks work on some or some work on the other, or another kind of body of four work together on the next iteration for us. So with that, before I talk process, let's talk substance and look at the categories of work. So there was a category of work focused on narrative and narrative change, and then a category of work planning now for changing the PSA. So some short-term ideas that folks had are on opportunities for rezoning low to high density. Peter, you saying that about seeing 1 to 3 acre lots in the West. And someone just repeated it on this call, Jonathan. And of course, like we said and it's captured here as well. And so in the West, some opportunities for rezoning as well as revisiting the fee in lieu. So let me stop there and just ask for some of our subgroup members. Does anyone want to add any context to what I just shared or amend anything before we discuss this briefly?
Can you go up a little higher to the beginning of the first
Sorry
one?
if I'm creating nausea.
Okay.
I'll give a moment for absorption. A question for you all to think of that we may not have time to like build at this moment is I think we heard a lot on redistricting, and while that is the cross into education, I think I've shared before, education's talking a lot about what happens in after folks enter the door, after students enter the door, and some of the hiring of educators, not necessarily redistricting. That doesn't mean they wouldn't, it's just not, it's not on the roster. So I just let you know that if you all want to consider something from that here too. So, Ian, I hope you don't mind me inviting you here. I know that your organization does some work on narrative change. And I wanted to just give you an opportunity if you wanted to react or share a little bit more about your thoughts on what you see here in front of you and some of the intersections with the work you do.
Well, it's also Vonda's involved with the organization as well. It is the Columbia Housing Center, and the Columbia Housing Center is a nonprofit organization that's relatively new that's focused on affirmative marketing of Columbia's neighborhoods. So essentially changing the narrative, right? Talking about all the benefits of living in these racially and economically diverse neighborhoods. It is focused on sort of, rejuvenating the Columbia vision. And I think, part of what I'm sort of trying to think through is how, I guess that's sort of, how do we not, to Phil's point about there being an urban core with wealthier suburbs around, how do we not exacerbate that trend, focusing more development outside of this urban core instead of thinking about opportunities for new development here that can create space for more people who are interested in living in walkable, diverse neighborhoods with plentiful open space and pathways that connect them to public facilities and their schools and neighborhood schools. Because something that I think is fundamental to all of this is the idea that investment follows development. And if where development goes, investment necessarily goes, both private investment, but also public investment. And, Oakland Mills High School has been delayed and delayed and delayed for systemic renovations. And it's not going to get those renovations unless there is a concerted effort to reinvest in this neighborhood. And I don't know how to, I can't fully process how to capture that sort of bigger story within this context. But
Sure.
That aside, Columbia Housing Center, the sole purpose of this is changing the narrative, and it's connecting people. Because I think one thing that people don't think a lot about. There are a lot of things that people don't think about when they buy a house. They look at a few things like that school score, but they don't think about the sort of bundle of goods that comes along with it. And that's what the Columbia Housing Center is trying to say, is that there are great living experiences in these neighborhoods that cannot be captured on the statistics on Zillow. And my dog is barking, so that's distracting right now.
No, it's fine.
But that's sort of said my piece.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Maybe there are some opportunities in there for the reframing opportunity or expanding the aperture of how people think about their home buying choices. I'm crossing the line. I'll get back in my facilitator lane. So let me just ask maybe some of you had a chance to skim this, what's right in front of you, or sort of below the fold on this next bit here. Is there anything that you would like to add or more nuance that you'd like to see? Well, we're going to build nuance, I should say, but anything substantive that's missing in terms of potential recommendations?
I don't think that what Ian just said is represented here.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it can be framed under cultural wealth, and I should understand this point too, because I am on the Columbia Housing Center. Sort of, like both things are important. It's actually important to encourage, as he was saying, investment and making sure that Columbia is a vibrant place. Encouraging that as well as making sure as there is continued development that is also diverse. So
Yeah.
Turn it around the other way that
and I think Phil has sort of made similar points too.
Yeah, do it where we demand more of an intentional development package for Columbia, which is now 50 years old, to tie into what you folks are doing. I mean, if you say it's great because it's great, yeah, I mean it's we just lost our pub in our neighborhood. Well, that's not great, I mean, so but people start investing. Some of the housing has to be taken down. Some things need to be replaced. And I think there needs to be a public component. Long Beach Village Center is a good example of that.
Thanks for naming that, and apologies I skipped through that. Does that cover, I mean, there's more to come of this, but does that reflect back? Does the wording I have here, inclusive community is where everyone feels like they belong? Is that a good reflection of this theme?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if that's something that structure is going to be able to address. But it's good to have it in writing that that's an intention.
Yeah. Okay. Noted for roofing. Okay, great. With it being 5:56, what I'd like to propose is one of two options, and I'd love the group's take on this. Coming down the pike, Carla and I will prepare, along with help from our chairs, we'll prepare some guidance on two things. One is just so you all know the format of the final report, or suggested format of the final report, just so there's continuity across subgroups, as well as in writing, just the recommendation development process, which our hope is, each group member sort of contributes to that development, helps us write things up, and agrees upon these recommendations unanimously by consensus, but we may go to majority. But right now we're transitioning to that recommendation development phase. There seems to be a healthy amount of consensus in this group that we can continue to sort of, and also good use of time in the meeting, that we could do a lot in our meetings. But as you could see, it really did help for us to have a group of folks further develop recommendations and then bring it to the group. So we don't have any speakers planned for next meeting. So what I'd like to suggest is that either one group or a couple of different subgroups break out and develop these into further into recommendation, into longer format recommendations that we can put into the county, into the memo, and then discuss them next week and refine them further together from this huge leap forward. So my question for the group is, first, does that resonate? Is that clear? Kind of our hope after this meeting is continued iteration and bringing it back to the group.
I think that's a great goal. But my experience has been that we are some extremely busy people. It was very, very difficult for our group to get together.
Sure. Do you feel comfortable that we can? I think we're going to need to then make our next meeting a working session where someone's sharing their screen and we're almost developing a document together. Jessica?
No, for the sake of time, because we're 5:59, I challenge some of the subgroup members to take this basically, I think an amazing document that sets a template, and take a stab at drafting some hardcore, detailed recommendations, and it will probably help us focus more on a brainstorming, editing session since we don't have any speakers. I think, kudos to Suzanne. I think this is setting the tone, and I think as you all read it and go through it, and hopefully you did before the meeting, someone will be able to take the lead and basically take this and draft some more defined recommendations that we can use for next month's meeting. So that's one statement, a challenge. And also, if you all would scroll down, there's a link to an article. I challenge you to read that article as well. Everyone, not just the subgroup that comes from this meeting, but check out this article in the Philadelphia Citizen. It was really cool. It was about what was her name? Sarah Bronin. She basically led a group. First of all, she's a land use law scholar. That's a big deal. And she formed a group they called Desegregate Connecticut. And through another platform, they basically did successfully what we're kind of trying to do. So she may be, I know we don't have speakers for next month, but she may be a point of reference to just come in and share her story and inspire us. Who knows? But it's an interesting article. It's an easy read, and it can actually get you excited about the work that we're doing.
Would anyone like to accept Jessica's challenge?
Was it a challenge to everyone, Jessica?
To volunteer, another small subgroup to take a stab, use our blueprint, and just draft some more.
Well, what I was
recommendations.
What I wonder if a few of us take a stab at this and just sort of start, as you said, sort of layer in some details and then pass it around. In other words, like it was much easier to talk about this because Susanna put together this great draft, and you can just go through all the points, and you see how the conversation just picked right up because we had a structure. But there's some, even rather than just be limited to one area, there might be, I can see some places where I'd like to add some comments and perhaps some ideas at different places, because almost everything in here is connected. They're not separate issues. They're sort of part of a bigger, older thing that we know is happening, but we're not really, we try to pin it in one area, but as you can see, you're talking about economics, historic racism, people, we're a very diverse county, and it turns out it's not the melting pot everybody wanted. People are very different. We have amazing communities here. So that is going to be an issue, and there is going to be a little friction. And so I don't know, maybe, as you look through it, you might feel a little more compelled to dip in at various places, and maybe make the edit in red or something. So, and then somebody can say, just like we did tonight, where, we said historic racism. We didn't say possible. We just dropped possible. We said, here. And I thought that it made it so, it just one word made it so strong. So I don't know, maybe that would be a good way to do it, because it's really hard to edit a whole document with 3 people or 5 people.
Could I suggest that you make it a Google Doc and invite, people to edit it online? And it could end up as a mess that way, but might be a way to get people's input.
Peter, that's exactly what I was going to suggest.
I would love to.
Peter?
We can't because of OMA.
Oh, okay.
Which offers its challenges.
What's OMA? I'm sorry.
The Open Meetings Act. Essentially, like, it's a public discussion we're having in a document, and not everyone in the public would then be able to edit it. So that causes challenges with the law.
Well, what if
We wouldn't
what if it
be
was
having a meeting.
what if it were publicly readable? I mean, because the public can't. I mean, the public can't just jump in and participate in what we're discussing either. They can observe us as we meet. So, could we make it publicly readable so they can observe what's happening in the document as we edit it?
Jessica?
Or we just need 2 or 3 people to take the lead and take a stab at it. And as a group, we'll revisit next month. Those rules are very strict. I know Phil knows, I know we had to take the certificate. It has to be a small little
Clear on what
group.
we need to do.
What's that, Vonda?
Yeah, I'm trying to be clear on what we need to do. So the next thing we need to do is, I guess at some point by May, we have to have draft recommendations. So is our sense that this needs to be put into a different format, or we need more recommendations?
Circulate guidance on that.
Specific recommendations, like about,
Yeah.
and we would change the Apfo law in this way, or like sort of, so maybe that would help people know what they're going to take on, or what they're going to, ignore. So.
Yep.
So you're saying like 3 people would take it and then we could bring that back to the meeting and then maybe other people could then do something similar, or?
Yeah. Why don't we do this for the next, between now and the next meeting, let's like return to the 1990s or early aughts when Google Docs didn't exist and it stays with 2 to 3 people. But in the meantime, perhaps Felix and Colette, can you triple verify whether Google Docs could be used, or in what universe could it potentially be used, and how can we remain compliant? So this way, between April and May, we have the possibility of getting it in Google Docs. Can you check with us?
Yep. We'll reach out to Opsible about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, so in the meantime, the 2 to 3 people, so what we're looking for right now is someone to add to the substance of this email, substance of this, put some additional meat on the bones, develop out the recommendation a little bit. In the meantime, we will be developing some examples to work off of for the final memo. In my mind, I see like a bolded recommendation, some supporting evidence from conversations here, from your own expertise and experience, or public testimony, and probably 2 to 3 pages of recommendations. That might almost be, for some of you that might feel like, oh, that's too little, and others that might be too much. But like, I would say that's probably my expectation on the median amount we might have. There's no limits set by the legislation on the report, but we'll talk more about that in our next meeting too.
Yeah, whoever decides to take it, if we can know who that person, whoever that is, if we have something we want to add, we can send it to that person and they can, maybe, I'm not going to do it this time because, I think it's good to move it around and, but, if we have thoughts, we can send it and they can add them to the notes.
Right. So anyone, do 2 to 3 people want to volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
Thank you, Ian.
It's Ian. Yep.
To volunteer?
Isabella, thank you. Okay, anyone else? All right. If someone else wants to, we'll send out an email with this document attached. Feel free to raise your, Phil, did I see your hand?
Yeah, you can add me, but I'd be happier because I tend to mouth off, not to have that dominant role, but to move it to the next meeting. I think we've got a good little crew here. So
right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things I don't feel comfortable enough working with. So hopefully some other people will step up with those sections.
Yeah. And maybe as you all go through that, you can tee that up, just like identified expertise or experience in the group, or the places where you'd like specific input.
Expertise, experience, or research. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. We're moving the ball down the court, and meanwhile, we're simultaneously providing guidance for this ultimately to feed into that report. And we'll go over that next meeting. I'll send info in advance. I know that we've stayed a little bit over time, and I just want to thank you all. I believe Jessica had to step out. So a quick recap, we have our meeting next, I'm sharing. Our meeting next, it's April 6th. I just don't have the agenda up in front of me. Our next meeting is April 6th from 4 to 6 p.m. And that's it. Oh no, Jessica, maybe I did see you on. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone, again, for continued engagement in this work. I recognize that we didn't get to debriefing on the public hearing. What I would encourage is there are a number of speakers that specifically did touch on land use and housing. I have those in notes. Thank you, Felix and Colette. I can share with you over email who hit on those general topics, if you'd like to go back to the public hearing and specifically listen to that testimony.
I would like to see that.
Yeah, I would.
I would too. Lauren, is there any way to get copies of any written feedback that's been received filtered down to land use and housing?
So we have all of the testimony that was formally submitted in the SharePoint folder. We can recirculate a link to the SharePoint folder and you can click in and explore that. There.
Okay, is it already filtered by the different subgroups? I'm used to seeing testimony just come in as like, huge swaths of virtual paper where you have to kind of read through all of it to figure out what topic they're on. But I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I'll check out the SharePoint.
Felix, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. So for testimony pertinent to this subgroup, we just uploaded the individual emails to that SharePoint folder that you'll be able to access. And if you're interested in reading other subgroups' testimony, there's a separate folder in there that says testimony for other subgroups, which you can go in and access. So that'll include the emails for this subgroup and then also testimony received from the library's event that they held a few weeks back. So, and I can recirculate that link for anyone who's having trouble accessing it.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll send the document with our volunteers. I'll name the specific speakers that hit on land use and housing. And then we'll share the SharePoint link if anyone needs that again. And also for next meeting, we'll make sure we have the guidance on like recommendation process and voting and some format for the final report. Great.